Greetings, my fellow freedom below the South and thinkers, LLC News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from beautiful Swampy Mango, South Florida, and today's date is Tuesday, November 6th, 2018. So, let us begin. Ooh, thanks for tuning in, my friends. It's been a while since the last show. Yep, Election Day in the United States of America, all around the country, and people will be manifesting and climaxing if their Lord and Savior gets in, whether they're a Democrat, Republican, etc. Let's see when this manifestation will come to an end. Yes, I'm at Stash, 109 Southwest 2nd Avenue in the heart of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the Himmelshire District to be exact, adjacent with Revolution Live and America's Backyard. Yeah, I did my early voting and chose the candidates that are most qualified to do the job. I didn't vote for the ones that run for governor that are sold their souls to the establishment. I'll just keep it at that. You figure it out. And it's funny when I hear the people play the Dixie Chick song, "Call for a Revolution." I just start laughing, going, not revolutionary enough. If their person gets in, they screw around. It's called exceptionalism. Right? Absolutely. So, without further ado, instead of me ranting about what's going to be happening, I'm going to start off a couple of posts here from Activist Post. And this one is entitled here, "Dear America, if voting made any real difference, they wouldn't let us do it." By Matt Agarist. And as it reads here, is op-ed on the freethoughtproject.com to be exact. It's election time again. That means that roughly 40% of eligible voters will rush to the polls to vote for the lesser of two evils, who think they will implement their political will for the benefit of the citizenry. Politicians will be waving signs on street corners as line up in elementary schools across the country to cast their vote for freedom or something like that. And a good example, you can see out there people have their signs for Rick Scott and Bill Nelson for the Senate. I call them the Wonder Twins. They think alike and smell the same. They do have a tyrannical fetish. Just an example. So get out there and cast your ballot for your favorite politician or don't. Even if you vote or not, and your party wins or not, the police state will continue. Constantly voting for lesser of two evils has manifested into an inevitable cycle in which government gets more powerful and the people get poor. Thank you, Alexander Hamilton. Your legacy is still pursued or continues. But don't take my word for it. Just look at the current state of America. 50% of all American workers make less than $30,533 a year. In the meantime, however, the politically connected elite made up of the 0.1% have increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion in the past year. $1 trillion also happens to be the same amount of money that the U.S. taxpayers had placed on their backs in the form of government debt in the last year. 2. Coincidence? Probably not. And don't blame capitalism for it, please, because Adam Smith is rolling in his grave. But if the Republicans keep the House, will make America great, right? Or if the Dems take the House, we can finally have nice things, right? Wrong. The reality of the situation is that no matter who gets elected, these politicians have already made a Faustian bargain to keep the police and warfare state in power. All hail to the military-industrial complex. Hallelujah. In today's political climate, it is no longer a question of which party is in power or which party will usher in totalitarianism. Instead, we have reached a point of simply waiting for the hammer to finally fall. Donald Trump ran on the platform to make government smaller, get America out of these endless wars, seize the chaotic and out of control spending, and rein in the overreaching executive. Instead, he continues wars, increased spending, and followed his predecessor's footsteps in using his position of president like a dictatorship, with executive order after executive order, mostly recently threatened to alter the very Constitution with one. Long my man does it, it's okay. Make America great again. If he burns the Constitution, he's the greatest president in history. We're not only speeding toward the edge of a perilous cliff, but arguing over who should steer the wheel, leaving no one competent enough available to man the brakes. Any politician who attempts to apply the proverbial brakes is laughed out of Congress, pushed to the fringes, and never sees the light of day in the mainstream media. Case in point, Justin Amish and Tulsi Gabbard. If I'm correct, Tulsi Gabbard was a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. I don't know if she still is now, but I remember looking it up. I could be mistaken, but if so, look it up. If I'm wrong, right or wrong, send it to me. All right, thanks. As Constitution Attorney John Whitehead so eloquently noted, we're being subject to more government surveillance, more police abuse, more SWAT team raids, more roadside strip searches, more censorship, more prison time, more egregious laws, more endless wars, more invasive technology, more militarization, more injustice, more corruption, more cronyism, more graft, more lies, and more of everything has turned the American dream into the American nightmare. What we're getting not more of elected officials who actually represent us. Of course, look what the governor's race is, Gillum and DeSantis, the two that I say who are pro-establishment. In my past episode on August 29th of this year, I talked about them, and I always say, don't believe the hype. American people are being guilted, bullied, pressured, cajoled, intimidated, terrorized, and browbeaten into voting. We're constantly told to vote because it's your so-called civic duty, because you have no right to complain about the government unless you vote, because every vote counts, because we must present a unified front, because the future of the nation depends on it, because God compelled us to do so, because by not voting, you are in fact voting because the other candidate must be defeated at all costs, or because the future of the Supreme Court rests in the balance. Nothing in the Constitution requires you that you vote. You are under no more obligation to vote for lesser evils. Indeed, voting for a lesser evil is still voting for evil. He's absolutely correct. I went for my card. I am a proud supporter of the Rutherford Institute, by the way. And I will be talking about one of his commentaries later on this show. They really have no problem flaunting this in front of our faces either. In fact, one congressman even spoke out in the book bragging about how voting doesn't matter and that the U.S. government views the citizens as sheep. In 2016, the internet exploded when the book Congressman X was published. In it, supposed concurrent or former congressman explained that voting is what keeps assholes like him in power. My main job is to keep my job, to get reelected. Congressman X asserts in the book, it takes presidents over everything. In regard to how the political class views the citizens, Congressman X did not hold back. Voters are incredibly ignorant and know little about our form of government and how it works, he says. It's far easier than you think to manipulate a nation of naive, self-absorbed sheep who crave instant gratification. Voters claim they want to substance and detail position papers, but they are really crave our cutesy cat videos, celebrity gossip, top 10 lists, reality TV shows, tabloid tripe, and the next effing Twitter message he rants. In case you haven't noticed it yet, voting changes nothing in regard to the status quo. If it did have any chance of changing anything significant, it would be illegal. What really changes things is disobedience to tyrants and pushing back against government corruption by refusing to be silenced. Seeking a lesser ignorance changes things, not repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So how do we do it? How do we shift the scales to favor freedom and liberty instead of a police state and tyranny? Well, it's not easy, but it's possible and necessary. As Whitehead notes, we get organized, we get educated, we get active. If you feel led to vote, so one moment. If you feel led to vote, fine. But if you all do is vote, we the people are going to lose. If you abstain from voting and still do nothing, we the people are going to lose. If you give the proxy to some third party individual to group to fix what's wrong with the country, that's all you do, then we the people are going to lose. However, if you're prepared to shake off the doldrums, wipe the sleep out of your eyes, turn off the television, tune out the talking heads, untether yourself from whatever piece of technology you're affixed to, wean yourself off the test of the nanny state, and start flexing those unsoothed civic muscles, there might be hope for us all. For starters, get back to basics. Get to know your neighbors, your community, your local officials. The first time of defense when it comes to securing your base, fortifying your immediate lines. Second, understand your rights. Know how your local government is structured, who serves on your city council and school boards, who runs your local jail. It has cooped by private contractors. What resources does the community have to voice concerns about local problems or disagree with decisions by local government officials? Third, know the people you're entrusting with your local government. Are your police chiefs being promoted from within your community? Are your locally elected officials accessible and equally important? Are they open to what you have to say? Who runs the local media? Does your newspaper report on local events? Who are your judges? Are their judgments fair and impartial? How are prisoners being treated in your local jails? Finally, don't get so trusting and comfortable that you stop doing the hard work of holding your government accountable. See, it means you got to be vigilant towards these individuals. Now proceed. Now, instead of sitting idly and complaining about those in power, let's fix it. You can start by sharing this article. It is not that people wants this Leviathan to continue. It is important like this. It's not readily available to them, and they don't know that there are other options. What's more, as we proved last month, this is on purpose, and the establishment is worried about the message of peace and liberty spreading. Once you wake someone up to the reality of the status quo, they will never go back to sleep again. The individuals will continue to enlighten and awaken their fellow humans with the message of peace and liberty until these individuals become the sleeping giant that is the idea whose time has come. And as Ron Paul famously said, no army can stop an idea whose time has come. I think it was Victor Hugo actually made that statement. Be the change you want to see in this world. Get off your ass, spread peace, and take the advice of Dylan Thomas when he says, rage against the dying of the light. He is absolutely correct, Mr. Agorist, on this commentary, and I do give him homage. You got to start from the bottom up, my friends, not the top down. And I have been writing periodically to my local servants. I still got to know some of the judges, which I do, but you always got to do a little more. Everyone's worried about Trump this, Trump that. They hate them so much. You're just scratching your own rear end and sniffing the anal vapors. And I say that out of respect. Like I said before, government in Latin means control of the mind. You can't trust these parasites at all. But one of the reasons why I always address that, because if you study history, government is the biggest enemy of society. They're the parasites, the vampires, whether it's local, state, or federal. And one great quote has to say here, Show me that age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of the rulers being good men, without a consequent loss of liberty. Patrick Henry. He said it the best. Never trust these individuals. Put their feet to the fire. Now we got the technology, my friends, via the internet. It can be done. They're the ones that are wigging out. When people learn how to utilize it and call these individuals out, that drives them crazy. Nail them with the facts, not hot air. That worries them more. I've done it. And I got people thinking. And this is why you always gotta be vigilant. And the difference is, my friend, we are not a democracy. We never have, never will. Technically, we're considered a constitutional republic, the rule of law. Even though they say we are considered a federal corporation under Title 28, Section 3002, subsection 15, I consider that null and void. I wrap my rear end on it and flush it down the toilet. All right, so the difference is we got a 3-vote system. You vote in the ballots, vote in the grand jury, and vote in the jury trial. They can make any law in the books. Victimless crime laws, you can say not guilty. One jury. One person can hang a jury. No victim, no crime. Nullification is the answer to these bad laws. And don't say it can't be done. It can. You got the power. They don't. They believe they do. But you got what it takes to just give them the big middle finger. Laugh at them. Ridicule them. Because they've earned it. And they don't like when I make these statements, but who the hell cares? I get inspired when I hear all this mumble-jumble garbage. You can use a penile microphone to them as well and tell them, don't worry, it's not sexual harassment. Okay, well, next one here came out today as well. And it says here, sadly, sound money isn't on the ballot. This is by Kurt Zegner. As it reads here, Americans will be headed to the polls to cast ballots in midterm elections. Polling suggests that Democrats will return to power in the House of Representatives. Republicans are favored to hold on to the Senate. However, political polls have proven less than reliable. There are plenty of people expecting a surprise once the votes are counted. But there are many policies that won't change regardless who holds congressional power come Wednesday. For starters, we can count on the contribution of huge deficits. The Treasury Department's most recent estimate is that government borrowing will double in 2018 versus last year. The bureaucracy is going to blow through $1.34 trillion more than this year's record tax revenue. That deficit will be the highest since 2010, back when the U.S. economy is mired in deep recession. Today, the IRS stands in high cotton. Imagine what deficit would look like if the tax receipts were at recessionary levels and or Congress was launching a major stimulus program. The best case scenario for deficit hawks would be a Republican victory in tomorrow's elections, although an argument could be made that splitting power between the two chambers will result in somewhat of a stalemate in Washington, possibly meaning less expansion of government programs. Unfortunately, the best case is not all that good. Big government Republicans are already in control of Congress, even if the president's supporters admit Donald Trump is not conservative when it comes to borrowing and spending. The deficit is already exploding in size under best case conditions. That's why forecasters have been calling $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. And nobody in Washington, D.C. cares about sound money. And that won't change regardless of who wins tomorrow. Democrat and Republicans leadership both adore the Fed for enabling them to perpetually spend way beyond their means. Candidates instinctively know better than to seriously rock the boat. That includes Republicans who are more concerned with reassuring voters they will protect entitlements and key programs like military spending. God bless the military-industrial complex. As things stand, the Tea Party movement to restrain spending is all but dead. Most citizens have forgotten the Fed's unpopular decision to bail out crooked banksters and stick Main Street with losses in 2008. Most never understood the central bank's role in creating that and other economic crises in the first place. Instead, Fed officials managed to once again claim credit for saving the U.S. economy by blowing yet another bubble in the process the central bank expanded its powers dramatically. Some of the extraordinary measures launched by the Fed in recent years were promoted publicly. Others have been run completely in the dark. None encountered meaningful opposition. Given the nearly full support of politicians and citizens alike, what we can expect, but lots more plunge protection, QE, and whatever else the central planners deem necessary. Pressure is already building on the Fed to be ridiculously accommodative again. Rising interest rates have pushed the dollar higher in foreign exchange markets. Now the stock markets are beginning to flounder. Meanwhile, President Trump wants central bank to pause rate hikes and promote inflation. If necessary, he could install new leadership at the Fed to make sure that happens. He's my man. Along he has the Federal Reserve, he'd be brilliant. Isn't that the president's only option, though? Jim Rackers recently made an astute observation. If central bankers won't play ball, Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin certainly will. There is plenty he can do to weaken the dollar. To return to sound money and eliminate government requires a 180-degree shift in ideology in Washington and informed electorate. Sorry to say that isn't going to happen no matter how this election turns out. He's the director of Metals Exchange. And I can say this, even to some people I've chat with, which they have progressive views, like Tim Canova, we have things in common, which is good. This was going to come to these people who are running for office, and he agrees about we need a silver certificate as a fiduciary note. That's a good way to go, and try to better it from there. Sound money is essential. It's constitutional. The Federal Reserve is illegal, null and void. If you study the history of fiat money, countries went into hell in a handbasket. A la Weimar Republic of Germany, Argentina, Zimbabwe, just to name a few. Past today's greatest teacher, my friends, and they still want you to believe that crappy hype. Of course, you hear about the whole thing with Bitcoin and so forth. And I'm not going to knock them completely either. Always got to be careful. Always got to keep things in the balance. Never leave all your financial eggs in one basket. Vigilance is the key, my friends. And even at the state level, when you see states like Utah and a few others are doing transactions, for certain transactions, gold and silver, which is good. Every state in the Union can do that under Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. You can use money as long as it's gold and silver. So that'll be your best options, my friends. And I pursue everyone on the local level and state level to let these people know there's other alternatives. You don't need the Federal Reserve. They need us. They want us enslaved. Let's destroy Hamilton's curse once and for all. I'll be right back. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so next thing I'm going to be talking about is interesting. This is a couple from Bob Livingston's alerts. Brandon Smith did two of these. And it says here, first one says, the economy doesn't care who wins the midterm elections. As I write this, the U.S. midterm elections are only a few days away. So this is old. I've been receiving numerous requests from readers to publish any of my predictions on the outcome of the event. But I have not done so for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I view the election process very differently from many people. I don't see it as legitimate in the slightest. Therefore, my predictions of the past have been based not on voter turnouts, polls, or any such nonsense. Elections are molded events, framed under the false pretense that the left-right paradigm in politics is real. As far as the upper echelons of politics are concerned, the paradigm is completely theatrical. To be sure, the average American does lean either left or right on the political spectrum. Such divisions are a natural part of social discourse. However, political theater is designed in most cases to drive citizens away from centrally shared principles of freedom and equal opportunity, not equal outcome, and push them to the far end of the spectrum towards extremism and zealotry. And to be clear, there is no good form of zealotry. Zealots are not self-aware, and they never subject their own position to scrutiny. They operate on pure assumption that they are divinely correct in everything they do, and anyone who disagrees with them, even in the slightest, is an enemy that must be destroyed by any means necessary. Yeah, check out the Maxine Waters Mickey Mouse Club, right? Zealotry is the root of human atrocity. Zealots are a tidal wave that creates war and genocide. They are a cancer on the soul of mankind. Central groups of people within the establishment, namely globalists, that desire total centralized control of every aspect of economy and society, prefer that the public remain as radicalized and divided as possible. For them, zealotry is an asset. To pursue this goal, they purchase allegiance from politicians through various means, including financial favors, media favors, and campaign contributions, which is nothing more than bribes, right? There are very few people left in politics that are not part of the club. Both Democrat and Republican leaders are essentially on the same side, the globalist side. That's right, my friends. Like I said before, don't believe the hype. They attack each other with rhetoric, but when it comes down to actual policy and action, they are all very similar. The outcome of elections is therefore erroneous in the long term. Their only purpose is to manipulate public psychology towards a certain reactionary endgame. When I predicted the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and many months before voting commenced, I did so based on which election outcome better served the interests of the globalists. I conclude with the highest certainty that Donald Trump would win based on the same premise that drove me to predict the success of the Brexit vote in the UK. That premise being that the globalists would allow populist conservatives to gain illusionary foothold on political power, only then collapse the global economy on their heads and blame them for the disaster. At the time, it was unclear whether Donald Trump would play along with the globalist narrative of conservatives as selfish, bumbling villains. Today, with his consistent relationship with bank elites and globalist think tank members, it's obvious that Trump intends to play the role he has been given. Trump's policy actions the past 2 years indicate that he is following a model very similar to the one Republican President Herbert Hoover just before the crash of 1929. Trump was the perfect choice for the globalists. So the question I have to ask in terms of the midterm elections. What outcome best serves globalist interests this time? The only conclusion I can come to in this instance is it does not matter who wins the midterms. The globalists will get their economic crash regardless, and conservatives will still be blamed. Continue on here. The assumption I have seen floating around the alternative media is that if Republicans maintain control of Congress and the Senate, stocks will rocket to new highs and financial system will improve. If Democrats win, the assumption is that stocks will plummet and many of the Trump policy initiatives will be obstructed. There's a very short-term view of the situation that ignores economic reality. It is certainly possible that equities will jump on the news of a Republican win, but I see this is a very limited event, lasting perhaps 1 or 2 weeks. In the long run, as December approaches, stocks and every other sector of the economy will continue current or accelerated declines. Here are the facts. New home sales, an indicator highly valued by mainstream economists, has been in decline for the past year, hitting 2-year lows in September. This has come as a surprise to many mainstream analysts because the story thus far has been okay. How many trains are coming in? I'll start from the paragraph again. This has come as a surprise to many mainstream analysts because the story thus far has been the U.S. in advance in the recovery, which could continue the supposed rejuvenation of the housing market. Alternative economists will give you the real story on home sales, though. The housing boom hailed in the mainstream over the past few years was a farce driven primarily by corporate behemoths like Blackstone. companies buying up distressed properties across the U.S. using cheap loans and bailouts through the Federal Reserve and turning them into rentals hardly constitutes a recovery in housing. Regular home buyers also have enjoyed artificially low mortgage rates for many years, but now mortgage costs are spiking as the Fed raises interest rates and corporate debt is becoming more expensive, making it less profitable for companies to continue vacuuming up properties. Add to this fact that the Fed is now dumping mortgage-backed securities, or MBS, from its balance sheet. They are the same securities that constitute a toxic influence that led to the mortgage derivatives bubble. It is hard to say exactly what effects will be as they add to existing ARM-style mortgages and derivatives already on the market, but I suspect the result will be destabilizing. Auto sales, another fundamental indicator used in the mainstream as a signal for economic health, is also failing recently. The U.S. auto sales plunged in September from 11% to 25%, depending on the company and the make of the vehicle. While the mainstream media argues this massive year-over-year decline was due to destructive hurricanes in 2017, creating overt demand, the truth is that the average monthly payment on a new vehicle has rocketed to over $525 in interest rates rise due to the Federal Reserve. Car sales, new and used, have thrived in recent years, in most part because of artificially low rates and arm-like loans to people who cannot afford them. Much like the mortgage bubble in 2008, the auto bubble is set to implode as car payments become too expensive for the average buyer and defaults increase. Perhaps the biggest factor in economic decline in the U.S. will be a corporate debt. As mentioned later, corporate debt has jumped to the record highs not seen since 2008, with the debt-to-cash levels in 2017 hitting lows of 12%, meaning on average for every $1 of a cash a company has in its reserve, it owes $8 in debt. How is all this debt being generated? It's all about stock buybacks. In 2018, the U.S. corporations increased spending on stock buybacks by 48%, while only increasing spending on development by 19%. Many corporations are spending far more capital and borrowing far more money just to keep their stock prices artificially propped than they are to invest in future growth. For almost a decade, the stock markets have been dependent on two pillars: near zero interest rates and asset purchases by the Fed. Stock buybacks are reliant on low rates and the corporate ability to borrow free money, which they can cycle into equities to buy up shares, reducing the amount of existing shares on the market and thereby increasing the value of the remaining shares through the form of legal manipulation. But as the Fed rises rates and stops acting as a lawyer of last resort, corporate borrowing becomes more expensive and buybacks will decline. In fact, the last half of 2018 shows a marked drop in announced buybacks as the apparent peak in July fades. In 2016, neither conservative president set to the Oval Office as the Federal Reserve pulled the plug on an artificial economic life support by raising interest rates into greatest corporate debt crisis since 2008. At this point, that program seems to be in full swing. People reading this article now might already be aware of the outcome of the midterm, but it's important to understand that where economic consequences are concerned, the result will be the same no matter who came out on top. On one hand, it makes sense for the globalists to desire a Republican majority, for when they crash, the market blame will fall entirely on the head of conservatives. On the other hand, it also makes sense for globalists to introduce a Democratic takeover of Congress, for they can continue to push citizens for further political extremes, as left blames the right for a financial crisis, while the right blames the left for political interference. In the meantime, the banking elite can simply blame the extreme political divide, wait until the crash runs its course, then sweep in after dust settles and admonish the capitalist structure, barbaric nationalism, populism, etc. They will shake their fingers at all of us if we should be ashamed, and then often their own solution to the disaster, which will surely include even more centralization and more power for the banking class. Regardless of who wins the midterm elections, the Fed continue to raise rates and cut assets, the housing market will continue to falter. Auto markets will implode, and the corporate debt will become a millstone on the neck of stock markets. The only difference that might occur due to the midterms will be a former collapse narrative would take. Trump may escalate his attention on the Federal Reserve, and with Republican majority, he might even shut the Fed down, which will result in a loss of world reserve status for the dollar and a monetary crisis. With a Democratic majority, it is likely the Fed will remain, which would mean continued rates increase and balance sheet cuts and economic weakness, resulting in the stock and bond crisis. Both events aid the globalists in what they call a global economic reset. Economic function and repair is far beyond the scope of any political body to fix when the dysfunction reaches the point we are today. To believe otherwise is foolhardy. The answer is not replacing one set of political puppets with another set of political puppets, but for regular people to begin localizing their own production and trade, to decouple from dependency on the existing system and start their own system. Only through this and the removal of the globalist tumor from its position of power and influence will anything ever change for the better. He's absolutely correct. Even when the time when the economy crashed in 1929, the Federal Reserve was responsible for that. If I'm correct, Franklin Roosevelt at the time, 1933, declared that the United States was bankrupt. The solution, Social Security Act. So technically we're under receivership for all these years. So it's not just a politician, it's not just whoever's in the party. It's always a bigger picture. This is why the central banking is dangerous. And anyone that supports it is treasonous. Congress is supposed to regulate money, not the Federal Reserve. When you learn more about this, you understand where I'm coming from. It's time to say hell no to the creature from Jekyll Island. And I know I say I was going to do 2 alerts from Bob Livingston, and I apologize for that. Because I got like a little schedule myself. I know it took a little while. So if you want to hit Bob Livingston, go to boblivingston.com/alerts, and you can get plenty of those. And even with this link, you can really real good stuff. So I always appreciate their work. Bob Livingston Alerts is published by Personal Liberty Media Group. Freedom, Love, and Sovereign Thinking, a lot of historical merit. I recommend everyone check them out, subscribe, and trust me, you won't be disappointed. Alright, I'll do one more here. It's by the Rutherford Institute, and it's a commentary from John Whitehead. A badge of shame. Government's war on America's military veterans. Came out on the 5th of November. For soldiers serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, coming home is more lethal than being in combat. Bernie Brown, research professor at University of Houston. Not all heroes wear the uniform of war. In the United States, however, we take a particular pride in recognizing as heroes those served in the military. Yet while we honor our veterans with holidays, parades, discounts in retail stores and restaurants, and endless political rhetoric about their sacrifice and bravery, we do a pitiful job of respecting their freedoms and caring for their needs once out of uniform. Despite the fact that the U.S. boasts more than 20 million veterans who serve in World War II to the present day, the plight of veterans today is America's badge of shame. With large numbers of veterans impoverished, unemployed, traumatized mentally and physically, struggling with depression, suicide, and marital stress. Homeless, subject to subpar treatment at clinics and hospitals, and left to molder while their paperwork piles up within Veterans Administration offices. Still, the government's efforts to wage war on veterans, especially those who speak out against government wrongdoing, is downright appalling. Considerably raise our young people to the steady diet of militarism and war, set them on the idea that defending freedom abroad by serving the military is their patriotic duty. When they return home, bruised and battle-scarred, committed to defending their freedoms at home, we often treat them like criminals merely for having served in the military. The government even has a name for its war on American veterans, Operation Vigilant Eagle. There's a link for that. You can read for yourselves. First, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, this Department of Homeland Security program tracks military veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and characterizes them as extremists and potential domestic terrorists because they are just being disgruntled, disillusioned, or suffering from the psychological effects of war. Coupled with DHS dual report on right-wing and left-wing extremism, which broadly defines extremists and individuals as military veteran groups that are mainly anti-government, rejecting federal authority in favor of state or local authority, or rejecting government authority entirely. These tactics bode ill for anyone as seen as opposing the government. Yet the government is not merely targeting individuals who are voicing their discontent so much as taking aim at individuals trained in military warfare. Don't be fooled by the fact that DHS has gone extremely quiet about Operation Vigilant Eagle. Where is there smoke, there's bound to be fire. And government's efforts to target military veterans whose views may be perceived as anti-government makes it clear that something is afoot. In recent years, military servicemen and women have found themselves increasingly targeted for surveillance, censorship, and threatened with incarceration or involuntary commitment, labeled as extremists and or mentally ill, and stripped off their Second Amendment rights. Hopefully Flip-Flop Rick Scott's listening to this show right now. Still have contempt for that clown. An important point to consider, however, is that under guise of mental health treatment and with the complicity of government, psychiatrists, and law enforcement officials, these veterans are increasingly being portrayed as threat to national security. It is not the first time that psychiatry has been used to exile political prisoners, and many times throughout history in totalitarian regimes, such governments have declared dissidents mentally ill and unfit for society as a means for rendering them, disempowering them. As Pulitzer Prize-winning author Anne Applebaum observed in Gulag, A History, they exile prisoners to a distant place where they can play their debt to society. They make themselves useful and not contaminate others with their ideas or their criminal acts. It is a practice as old as civilization itself. The rulers of ancient Rome and Greece sent their dissidents off to distant colonies. Socrates chose death over the torment of exile from Athens. The poet Ovid was exiled to a fitted port on the Black Sea. For example, government officials in the Cold War era Soviet Union often used psychiatric hospitals as prisons in order to isolate political prisoners from the rest of society, discredit their ideas, and break them physically and mentally through the use of electric shocks, drugs, and various medical procedures. It seems that ideas about a struggle of truth and justice informed by personalities with a paranoid structure, the psychiatric community actually went so far as to provide the government with a diagnosis suitable for locking up such freedom-oriented activists. In addition to declaring political dissidents mentally unsound, Russian officials also made use of an administrative process for dealing with individuals who are considered bad influence on others or troublemakers. Andrew Kennan describes a process in which an obnoxious person may not be guilty of any crime, but if, in the opinion of the local authorities, his presence in a particular place is prejudicial to public order or incompatible with public tranquility, he may be arrested without warrant, may be held for 2 weeks or 2 years in prison, and may then be removed by force to any other place within the limits of an empire, and there to be put under police surveillance for a period from 1 to 10 years. Administrative exile, which required no trial and no sentencing procedure, was an ideal punishment not only for troublemakers as such, but also for political opponents of the regime. Sounds familiar? This age-old practice by which despotic regimes eliminate their critics or potential adversaries by declaring them as mentally ill and locking them up in psychiatry wards for extended periods of time is a common practice present day in China. What is particularly unnerving, however, is how this practice of eliminating or undermining potential critics, including military veterans, is happening with increasing frequency in the United States. Remember the National Defense Organization Act, or NDAA, opened the door for the government to detain as a national security threat anyone who viewed as a troublemaker, According to government guidelines for identified domestic extremists, a word used interchangeably with terrorists. Technically, anyone exercising their First Amendment rights in order to criticize the government qualifies. It doesn't take much anyone to be flagged as a potentially anti-government in a government database somewhere. Main Core, for example, that identifies and tracks individuals who are inclined to march in the lockstep of the government's dictates. In fact, as the Washington Post reports, communities are being mapped and residents assigned a color-coded threat score, green, yellow, or red. So police are forewarned about a person's potential inclination to be a troublemaker depending on whether they had a career in the military, post a comment perceived as threatening on Facebook, suffer from a particular medical condition, or someone who knows someone who might have committed a crime. The case of Brandon Rowe is a prime example of Operation Vigilant Eagle in action. Rob, a 26-year-old decorated Marine, actually found himself interrogated by government agents about his views on government corruption, arrest with no warning, labeled mentally ill, subscribing to so-called conspiratorial views about the government, detained against his will in a psych ward for standing by his views, and isolated from his family and friends and attorneys. On August 16, 2012, a swarm of local police, Secret Service, and FBI agents arrived at Rob's Virginia home, asking to speak with him about posts he made on his Facebook page made up on song lyrics, political opinions, and dialogue used in a political thriller virtual card game. Among posts as troublesome were lyrics to a song by a rap group, and Rob's view shared increasingly by a number of Americans that the 9/11 terrorist attacks were an inside job. Man, it sounds like he heard of Immortal Technique, or maybe Chris Geo. I'll just leave it at that. Possibly. I'm not saying these guys are bad, too. They're good guys. So, after a brief conversation, and without providing an explanation, levying any charges against Rob, or reading him his rights, Rob was then handcuffed and transported to police headquarters, then to a medical center, where he was held against his will due to alleged concern that his Facebook posts were terrorist in nature. Oh, how dare you criticize the government? You are a terrorist. You are a free thinker. See what's going on here? Thought criminality, my friends. Very Orwellian indeed. As I continue on here, outrage onlookers filmed, arrest, and posted the footage to YouTube, where it quickly went viral. Meanwhile, a kangaroo court hearing that turned a deaf ear to Robe's explanation about the fact that his Facebook posts were being read out of context. Robe was sentenced up to 30 days further confinement in a psychiatric ward. Thankfully, Rutherford Institute came to Robe's assistance, which combined with heightened media attention brought about his release, may have helped prevent Rob from being successfully disappeared by the government. Even so, within the days of Rob being seized and forced to be held in a VA psych ward, news reports started surfacing of other veterans having similar experiences. Oppositional Defiance Order, or ODD, is another diagnosis being used against veterans who challenge the status quo. As journalist Anthony Martin explains, an ODD diagnosis, quote, denotes that the person exhibits symptoms such as questioning of authority, the refusal to follow directionist, stubbornness, the unwilling to go along with the crowd, and the practice of disobeying or ignoring our orders. A person may also receive such a label if they consider free thinkers nonconformists, or individuals who are suspicious of large centralized government. At one time, the accepted protocol among mental health professionals was to reserve the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder for children or adolescents who exhibited uncontrollable defiance toward their parents and teachers, unquote. I may have some ODD, allegedly speaking, according to this little quote, right? Frankly, based on how well my personality and my military service in the U.S. Armed Forces fit with the description of oppositional defiance disorder, I'm sure there's a file somewhere with my name on it. Don't worry, Mr. Whitehead, I may be in the same category. That government is using the charge of mental illness as a means to which to immobilize and disarm these veterans is diabolical. With one stroke of a magistrate's pen, these veterans are being declared mentally ill, locked away against their will, and stripped of their constitutional rights. If it was just being classified as anti-government, that would be one thing. Unfortunately, anyone with a military background and training is now being viewed as a heightened security threat by police who are trained to shoot first and ask questions later. Feeding perception of veterans as ticking time bombs in need of intervention, the Justice Department launched a pilot program in 2012 aimed at training SWAT teams to deal with confrontations involving highly trained and often heavily armed combat veterans. God bless the police state when they know best, screw the rest. The result? Police encounters with military veterans often escalate very quickly into an explosive and deadly situation, especially when SWAT teams are involved. For example, Jose Garina, a Marine who served in two tours in Iraq, was killed in an Arizona SWAT team, kicked open the door of his home during a mistaken drug raid and opened fire. Thinking his home was being invaded by criminals, Garina told his wife and child to hide in the closet, grabbed a gun, and waited in the hallway to confront the intruders. He never fired his weapon. In fact, the safety was still on when he was killed. The SWAT officers, however, not as restrained, fired 70 rounds of ammunition at Garina. 23 of those bullets made contact. A part of his military background, Garina had no prior criminal record, and the police found nothing illegal in his home. Yay! I love you guys. That's what we got. If you see those TV, do yourself a favor. Don't watch that TV show SWAT. That's Police Chief Daryl Gates' vision. He started that. That was a police chief from Los Angeles, my friends. Remember the Rodney King case? Daryl Gates, Police Chief Daryl Gates. Look him up. You'd be surprised. A man is an Orwellian, a tyrannical douchebag. Continue on here. John Edward Chanzy, a 62-year-old Vietnam veteran, was killed by a SWAT team, allegedly responding to a call that the Army veteran was standing in the San Diego apartment window waving what looked like a semi-automatic rifle. The SWAT officers locked down Chesney's street, took up position around his home, and fired 12 rounds into Chesney's apartment window. It turned out the gun Chesney reportedly pointed out at police from the 3 stories was a realistically mock assault rifle. Ramon Hooks' account with the Houston SWAT team did not end as tragically, but it very easily could have. Hooks, a 25-year-old Iraqi war veteran, used an air rifle gun for target practice outside when a Homeland Security agent allegedly house shopping in the area reported him as an active shooter. Assume, kinda, sorta, this the only way, right? It wasn't long before the quiet neighborhood was transformed into a war zone. What does in the cop cars, an armored vehicle, and heavily armed police. Hooks was arrested, his air rifle pallets and toy gun confiscated, and charges filed him for criminal mischief. So you see what's going on here, my friend? They want you to believe they know more than you. You know what I'm saying? So that's why you always gotta look at these things a lot more thoroughly. So I am gonna continue on here with this. Given government increasing views of veterans as potential domestic terrorists, it makes one think twice about government programs encouraging veterans to include a veteran designation on other driver's licenses and ID cards. Held by politicians as a way to make it easier for military veterans to access discounts from retailers, restaurants, hotels, and vendors across the state. It will also make it much easier for the government to identify and target veterans who dare to challenge the status quo. Remember, no one is spared in the police state. Eventually, as I make it clear in my book, Battlefield America, The War on the American People, we all suffer the same fate. It stands to reason that if government can't be bothered to abide by its constitutional mandate to respect the citizen's right, whether it's the right to be free from government surveillance and censorship, the right due process and fair hearings, the right to be free from roadside strip searches and militarized police, or the right to peacefully assemble and protest exercise our right to free speech, then why should anyone expect the government to treat our nation and veterans with respect and dignity? Of course, God bless the technocratic society, right? So if you really want to do something to show your respect and appreciation for the nation's veterans, here's a suggestion. Skip the parades and the retail sales and the flag waving. Instead, go exercise your rights to freedoms that those veterans risked their lives to protect by pushing back against the government tyranny. Freedom isn't free. It is time for the rest of the nation start to pay the price for the freedoms we often take for granted. Absolutely. And this is why, my friends, for the past 17 years, I was against Homeland Security, and I still am today. You gotta call me a terrorist, then it has to be good. Every terrorist, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. That's why the war on terror is a conflagration with the American people and the world, regardless of what you look like. There's no such thing as white privilege, because we're all in the same technocratic plantation, my friends. Don't listen to the propaganda matrix. Don't listen to mind control. Don't listen to these bobbleheads on TV. You know who they are, these weak and pathetic fools that want you to listen to them. The hell with their Pol Pot ideology, Hitler ideology, Stalin, etc. Never trust the government. That's why Patrick Henry said that the best when I address aforementioned. Without us, they are nothing. Stop kissing their rear end. Don't worry. Like you see, we're going to the NFL. How come I don't see everyone complain about Kaepernick kneeling down? Oh, respect the flag. How come you don't go after the commissioner for selling his ass to the Homeland Security and people get treated like little prisoners? But it's okay. It's exceptional. It makes us feel safe. Remember, giving up your freedom for temporary security, you deserve nothing. I'm paraphrasing that from Benjamin Franklin. All right, my friends, and that is it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us on your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or if you say something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please address your correspondence with decorum. And I noticed Gab is back on the internet, which is fantastic. And give the big middle finger to Howard Dean and his lackeys, saying that Gab is responsible for the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre. You give him the Rudy Giuliani attitude adjustment. Okay? People know what I'm talking about if you know me long enough. Okay? Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance helped to fulfill and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.